Joined right now by Connecticut Democratic Senator Chris Murphy, Robert Costa, national political reporter for the Washington Post and an MSNBC political analyst, Michael Steele, former RNC chair and an MSNBC political analyst, Ruth Marcus, columnist for the Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor. A great final. You're the final four for tonight for us.
Oh boy.
Senator Murphy, is there any way this isn't going to become an enormously political decision by your fellow members of the Senate, especially from the red states?
He decided to make this a momentous political moment by outsourcing the decision to the Heritage Institute and to the Federalist Society the day that he basically put these right-wing political organizations in charge of selecting the next Supreme Court justice, who have basically telegraphed that the only people on those lists are people who will not only overturn Roe versus Wade, but possibly the right to privacy in Griswold v. Connecticut.
That was the one about the birth control pills way back then, right?
Yeah, and I just don't think you have to mistake what the agenda is here. The agenda is not just to get rid of Roe, it's to go after Griswold itself so that you can come after contraception. So the minute that he outsourced the decision to those political groups, he knew that he was going to be in for the fight of his life, and he knew it was going to be hard to keep all of the Republicans, some of which have a big problem with a court that's going to overturn the right to full reproductive health care for women.
Robert Costa, I think that Trump is playing this not just to rule the Supreme Court for the next 40 or 45 years, as he puts it, because he could well do that. If Ginsburg retires next year or later, he can still grab 3 seats altogether and make it 6-3, and overwhelmingly a right-wing court. My question is he also using this as a political tool to destroy the political future of people like Heidi Heitkamp out in North Dakota, of Joe Manchin in West Virginia, of Joe Donnelly in Indiana, and possibly end or shorten the career of Doug Jones down in Alabama by saying, vote your state or vote your party. You choose, and I'll kill you either way. Your thoughts?
The poking and prodding of these red state Democrats politically starts today. You saw it in the invitations, Chris, from the White House that went out to those 4 red state Democrats. They all declined to go. So did moderate Republican Susan Collins of Maine. And the minute this person's announced tonight, you'll see the Judicial Crisis Network and other conservative groups put millions of dollars on the airwaves to try to pressure these red state Democrats running in states won by Trump to back the nominee.
Michael, this is a political test, and I'm going to say at the end of the show, I can say it right now, I think it's going to be brutal for people like those senators I just mentioned, because Trump says to them, and he is connivingly brilliant at this. He said, are you going to vote the way your people at home would vote on this nomination or the way your party's going to vote? He's going to middle them, force them to choose between their party and their state.
I think, Chris, in many respects,
nasty.
They've already made that choice. They're going to vote the way their people at home want them to vote.
Well, then this nomination's dead. I mean, it's in for sure.
No, it's in for sure, because I think this choice, whether it's one of the 2 gentlemen that you showed at the beginning of the program, or even someone else who we've not talked about on this list, they're going to be cut very close out of that cloth of Gorsuch. They're going to be that type of nominee. They're not going to be someone that is going to swing so far in the debate that it makes it hard for those votes to congeal, if you will, around this nominee. For the
no Borks in there.
Right. There's not exactly. There's not that play. So I think the president has listened to a lot of smart people about this. This is the one time where the president sort of gives himself over to others in that regard. Yes, he does the showman bit out front, but behind the scenes, he's listening and following directions on this. And I think this nominee is not going to be the kind of political play that people anticipate it will be.
Hit at it from both directions. The values question that's at work here. What kind of a country do you want to live in? What rights should women and other people have, gay people have, and respect and dignity? All those values questions against the politics of the game here is playing. And it is a game he's setting up here by doing this.
So the politics are really clear. You have to be able to get to a majority of votes against the nominee. And the only way you're going to get to that 51. Is if you peel off the Republican senators who declined wisely, I think, the White House's nomination tonight. I will be stunned if it's one of the 2 folks, Kavanaugh or Hardiman, if they end up voting against them. If that is true, why would Democrats in those red states sort of go on the political suicide mission? Why would Chuck Schumer, the leader, want them to go on the suicide mission? Pay attention
I'll give you a reason.
To your prospects.
I'll give you a reason.
Pay attention to your prospects for
Ocasio-Cortez. because the leadership is going to be trashed if they let this go by them.
Well, they can trash it, but they need to worry about trying to claw back as close to a majority as possible. You know, on the substance.
So you argue it's the best side of whatever. Discretion is the best form of power. In other words, decide now. You're not going to win this fight, so just try to win the Senate.
Do the math. You know, Justice Brennan used
you
to say the most important
You're a voter.
thing.
No, I think this notion that it's a suicide mission for Democrats in Trump-leaning states to vote against a pro-corporate, anti-choice, anti-collective bargaining nominee is ridiculous. The fact of the matter
is, North Dakota.
Well, in many of these states,
you may,
but in many of these states, you may have public who likes Trump, but the polling also tells you that they don't mind a senator who is going to be a check on Donald Trump.
Would you tell Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota with a small population, don't run on local issues, vote with your party on this and see how it goes?
I wouldn't tell Heidi or Joe or any of them to do anything. They're going to have to make their own decision. But I'm going to tell you, if you run a nationwide campaign making clear who this nominee is going to be, voters all across the country are going to have problems with the kind of decisions he or she
Robert,
is
let's go back to the way it would think, because this will be over sequential. There's going to be hearings. They're going to be all over television for months. The hearings are going to be dynamite, though. You know, there are people there that know how to really do the hearings. They're going to questions of religion perhaps are going to come up. We could go both ways. But my question is, won't the Democrats and the leadership, especially when they go into those private rooms in the Capitol, Schumer's room, they sit in there and they go, you're sitting there talking, you're Schumer talking to Heidi Heitkamp. You say, you know what? I think we're not going to get Murkowski or Collins. So you know what? You're free. I can hear that conversation. Because why commit suicide?
It's going to all depend on the hearings. I mean, they don't have that conversation until they see how these hearings go. And these hearings, as you say, could be explosive. If it's Judge Kavanaugh, they're going to go over his time with the special counsel in the 1990s, investigating Vince Foster and President Clinton. They're going to go over his work in George W. Bush's White House. If it's Judge Hardiman, they're going to look at all of these rulings he's done on gun rights that are very conservative. So if you're a Heidi Heitkamp of the world, it's TBD. It all depends on how these hearings play, how the country sees the nominee.
Can you find, do you think that, let me go back to the senator. Do you think a senator from these red states would find something strong enough to use back home against the nominee that they could justify it?
Absolutely. And I think it's right that this is all going to play out as the country learns who these nominees are. I think a lot of Trump's base, right, thought that he was going to take on corporate America, that he was going to try to return power to the people. What they're going to find is all of these judges were hand-selected by the Federalist Society because they are going to take power away from regular people and hand them to big corporations. I think if we make that case effectively, if we tell people that these are the judges who are going to take away federal protections for you if you have a pre-existing condition, that they're going to overturn the Affordable Care Act, all of a sudden this looks like a very different vote in those places than it may be if all that matters is that the judge was picked by Donald Trump. These judges are going to have a record, and we are going to make that very clear to the American people by the time.
I noticed that I get Bob Casey's information. Somebody put him on my list, this fundraising list. I don't know how I get on there, but because I know the guy and I like him, but he's really pushing this corporate thing like you are. In other words, it's not all about Roe or against LGBT rights. It's also about what side are you on in terms of the economy. Are you with the rich people and the capital people, or are you with the working people?
Number one issue in America right now is health care, and this is a court that's going to decide whether or not the Congress can, under the Constitution, protect people from
How do they do it, by the way, now they've lost the individual mandate? Once you've lost individual mandate, you don't know how it's not perceived as a tax bill, which is the way Roberts voted for it.
But there's also, well, the answer is once it's not perceived as a tax bill, and because there's no individual mandate, there's no unconstitutional compulsion, no arguably unconstitutional compulsion. Look, I would have loved to see Justice Merrick Garland, would have loved to see him confirmed. I understand the anger and the frustration among Senate Democrats. I have to say, looking at a Judge Hardiman or a Judge Kavanaugh, I do not see this nominee as significantly different than what a President Jeb Bush or a President Mitt Romney would have picked.
Well, and
that's going to be hard to defeat.
You're very benign tonight. Anyway, on Meet the Press, Missouri Republican Roy Blunt, the senator from Missouri, said of all four finalists, he said they'd all be confirmed by this. All the four we've been hearing about, he said they're all going through with 50 votes plus the vice president. Let's hear him.
I think they'll all be, they're good judges. I think they'd be fine justices of the Supreme Court. I think the president has to think about it. Who is the easiest to get confirmed here? And I expect we'll do that on sort of a normal timetable of a couple of months.
Well, that's what we're hearing from Michael here. They're going to go for the one that can slip through easily. Anyway, the Washington Post reports that President Trump spoke with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell on Friday. Quote, McConnell did not push any choice on the president. But the report goes on to add that McConnell did note that Hardeman and Kethridge could fare well in the Senate because their reputations and records were not as politically charged as the others on the president's short list of nominees. Senator, you're here. I love to have you here, by the way. Thank you, because I like to have a senator who's here who has some inside the body. You know, the feel in that body when everybody talks to each other in the cloakrooms. Would we be better off with the old 60-vote requirement where you had to have some kind of bipartisan consensus to get anybody through? Wasn't that a better system?
I've been a critic of the filibuster, but I always thought that it made sense for the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
I didn't mind getting rid of it for the lower courts for presidential appointees. And I also, frankly, don't mind a conversation about reforming it for legislation. But when it comes to the Supreme Court, a lifetime appointment, especially now that presidents are picking people in their 40s and 50s.
Forever.
Yeah, it certainly seems
Ruth,
that
you agree with that as a
60
philosopher and a column writer?
Yeah, actually, I share the senator's view. Don't like the filibuster for executive branch nominees, do like it for judicial nominees. I think once you made the decision to get rid of the filibuster for lower court nominees, it was absolutely inevitable. It was going to be eliminated for the Supreme Court.
Where are you
as
in
well.
this?
I like the filibuster because I like the drama.
Okay, well, you like the advice and consent.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.